There we go. That's a recording started. Let's begin perhaps with a small round of introductions. Could you tell me a little bit about what do you currently do and what's your connection to AI in education?
Yeah, so both in my last role and my upcoming role, which will be actually directly focused on its Senior Associate Director of AI in Teaching and Learning at Northeastern. But even my previous role is uh, Director of Faculty Development and Innovation at College Unbound. A lot of my work is thinking about like where does this tool fit in within the teaching and learning landscape? And what is my like how do I want to support, think about both in collaboration with students and faculty, like where does it appropriately fit? Where does it challenge some of our expectations? And what are the new use cases we need to think about and for a tool that we're still trying to figure out?
All right. And in your previous long role, how long had you been working in that? And
So I've been working there for 3 years, and with the AI stuff, really since December 2022 when ChatGPT first came out, and with a colleague of mine, recognized, we're going to have to think about what do we do with this? How do we prepare and support faculty and students? And then resulted in me even running a course in January 2023 around AI in education, where with students, we explored and played around with generative AI to actually create our institutional usage policy for faculty and students around generative AI use.
awesome. That sounds useful.
Mm.
I know many institutions are still trying to wrap their heads around what policy should look like.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess to ground the rest of conversation, what do you call AI? What does that mean to you?
I think currently, I mean, I use it for the stand-in of particularly generative AI that is able to um, produce outputs from very, what I would say is simple inputs, meaning largely language-based inputs of like being able to tell it like build me a syllabus or make me a song about, or the whether it's textual output, video, audio, multimedia. I'm thinking even like websites, which is a mixture, multimedia uh, outputs. I think to me, that's largely what I'm thinking about currently because that feels like that's the most cutting or it's the most leading edge in what we talk about when we talk about AI. Like we know we've had it for, you know, uh, some would argue up to 15 to 20 years now in different forms, but really the form that feels like you can put it into everyday people's hands and they can play around with it and really master it with no substantive understanding of code or programming or like as they say get under the hood and more just finding practical everyday uses of it just through everyday language.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to generative AI models, I guess we're really thinking about generating language, images, videos, stuff like that. But where is the boundary? Because I guess it's kind of a line between a spell checker or next word suggestion in a text message up
Mm.
to a chat GPT. Is there a
Mhm.
line where you would say that's AI and that's not AI, for example?
That's a great question. I would say I would say it's a little more it's a little harder to pin down, but I think in some ways that line feels like when it starts to get into the space where, and it's very in this way, it's very individually defined, I suppose, but like where it's doing, conceiving, constructing things that are beyond the immediate scope of a person. um, meaning, you know, grammar we can fairly get, but as it gets into like being able to say uh, construct words together in a coherent manner that may be beyond the user, maybe beyond the user's understanding and ability in that moment. So I think about for myself, I don't have a lot of programming background, but I was able to play around with it and with AI enough to come up with a daily routine that then it exported into an iCalendar file. And like that's something I wouldn't have been able to do, but I'm able to describe it enough for the AI to do it. And I think to me that's probably the line is where it starts to be able to do things that feel beyond the capability, the immediate capability of the user.
Interesting. Uh-huh. Okay. Then let's go with that definition for the rest of this conversation when we talk about
Mhm.
AI. But for now, let's
Hmm.
put it on a shelf on the side. I'd like to also ask, have you got any experience with open education?
I have been deeply interested and invested in open education for probably 12 or 13 years, almost as long as I've been doing instructional design and faculty support, as well as my own teaching, and have leaned on uh, building building substantial open educational resources, helping faculty build, what is it, adapt, adopt, and build their own OER materials, and it's usually a conversation that I'm always interested in.
Hmm. Uh-huh. And in that context, what does open mean to you?
Um, I think for me, it's typically meaning the barriers to take advantage of uh, the the item in question are as minimized as possible. And so, and I think again, that's something it's a little harder context. It's something that gets contextually defined because we really only have we really only have the open educational movement that we have because of the internet. And so there's always there's a technological piece involved in that all of this requires access to certain technologies. Um, so that is what I mean when I'm saying like this idea of open is like there's a there's a way in which the idea is to remove as many barriers as possible, knowing that there's always certain barriers that are a result of, well, the technology. But barring that, we have the freedom and availability to make use of practices or resources or what have you, um, with little to no, little to no being held back by often things like copyright that therefore keep us from using things for educational purposes um, or technical barriers such as like what are they called? Is it DRM, digital rights management tools that either lock the documents in the materials or the materials can only be used through certain programs that are themselves you need descriptions or things too. So to me, it's really is there opportunity to, you know, genuinely engage with whatever the thing is that we're calling open without necessarily having to navigate a lot of legal barriers or a lot of technological barriers.
Okay, so it's quite broad. There's technical aspects, there's legal aspects, and then There's, I guess, often a topic that comes up in when we talk about being able to use is individual abilities, skills, and knowledge. Um, so to what extent would you say something is open in general, as in it can be accessed? Or to what extent does it depend on the individual using it or trying to use it?
Yeah, I think for me that reminds me of a term I keep thinking about, this idea of techno capital. And to me it's this it, techno capital for me is this idea of we both being able to have access to technology and also the wherewithal what to do with it. You know, we have this belief of let's just give everybody computers. And I do think that's a nice idea, but if we aren't giving them the substantial support of how to utilize a computer or an internet access in the 21st century, like we're not necessarily helping them in the ways that we think we are. So to that end, I do think for it to be, and maybe that's maybe thinking of it as like it's almost like half open versus full open. Half open being like we have put them out there, we have put the things out there, but full open being like we have really created effective pathways, resources, supports for those things to be utilized by whoever is interested to engage with that, again, the object of what we're calling open.
Okay, I see. Interesting. So that now makes it more of a continuum than a binary open or not.
Yeah.
And then I guess building on that, for different people, they'll have different kinds of barriers to use. So does that mean that the same thing for it to be open, does it have to be accessible to everyone? Or is it like, I don't know, in quantum superposition of being open to some and not open to others?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where I went back to the when I was talking about open educational resources and saying that they're also technologically driven of like we can say we have an abundance of open educational resources and that there's been a massive movement and these are all available, but they are only available if you have a computer, if you can access the internet and you can access the parts of the internet that these resources are available. So I I I do feel like we inevitably have to recognize that that none of these come without expectations or needs of certain technological tools and ability to use those. So I think it's it's really open if, right? It's not open, but open if you have a computer and access to the internet or a uh, internet enabled device. Doesn't have to be a computer, just like anything that can access and that you can engage on the internet with.
Ah, and just to nitpick a little bit, as we go into the exact definition, is open a property of a thing by itself, or is it a perception by someone, would you
Hmm.
say?
Um, I would say it is a perception or projection onto something. In that you're right, it doesn't in and of itself necessarily have its own its own values. And we see that with why so much of open things are given CC licenses. That's the signal, right? That's the projection onto the thing that you can do something with it because the legal assumption is that you can't. Like you stumble onto something on the internet, and the legal perception is that somebody has put that there and has, by default, ownership of it. And so, yeah, I think that saying that openness is the is really a perception or a projection of what we put onto other things feels more accurate.
Hmm. Interesting. So now coming back to the shelf where we had shelved AI
Hmm.
as kind of tools that can do something beyond the user's immediate ability.
Hmm.
Um, what happens when we put these together? Open as people's perception or of something of how they are able to access it, to use it for their own purposes, and AI. So when we put them together, how might we define openness in the context of AI in education?
Um, hmm. Really appreciate this pathway you've walked me through. It's a really great thinking exercise. I mean, I think in that way, it reaffirms some of like what I think of as the nuance that we're having, or like some of the nuanced conversation that we're having around AI and how, in certain ways, it is, again, it's made available. Um, and some of it is being made available in a free version. Um, but we're not really quite sure if it's a open version. So like there's a interesting conflation here, a challenge of like the the, the legality of both how generative AI often creates outputs, right? So like the legal discourse that's happening currently of like, can they even do that legally, right? Can they the large language models, which are often based around large swaths of the copyrighted internet, can they do this without due compensation, which then introduces like even more discussion of who owns what, and also the legal considerations around the outputs of an AI. By and large, seem right now to say like actually you can't copyright that. Um, so there's this interesting tension of like on one part it is a discussion about it not being open, and that's that first the legal conversation about AI, whether these companies can do with AI what they want. But then there's also this interesting open projection that's put upon potential AI outputs because they're being seen as you can't copyright them. So they are put out there. You could see them as being put out there for anybody to take and do something with. So that's this piece of it, but we're still over here thinking about the like, what does it even mean for a user to use AI, and is that an open practice? Um, and I think I tend to think less so, um, in that there's, well, it depends. Think about if you if you want anything stable from most of the AI tools out there, you typically need an account, which means once you have an account, you're also signing away a variety of rights through the end user agreement, privacy, etc. Um, by contrast, if you don't want anything stable, um, you can go and use some of these without creating any kind of account. But you also don't have any means to show or connect the output of being in other words, you can't really not even cite, but just prove, justify, clarify that something came from an AI. And I think for me, that feels also, um, feels also elusive within the open space because this is getting really complicated. I hope it's clear. If we get to the point where outputs by AI have any kind of ownership, then you probably need proof of that. And if you don't have an account, you have no proof of that. I think that's really tricky as it comes to what we already said is it's perception or projection onto the AI. It's a sorry, it's a perception or projection onto something, and you lose that train if you can't cite the source of it. I think that's where my brain is going, and I think this makes sense. But as you can see, I'm thinking through it very much in the moment.
So let's recap a little bit. There were a few different elements I picked up. You mentioned, for example, that for AI to be open, then it should be accessible and there should be at least some part of it that's cost free. You mentioned open practices, and this comes back to thinking about what we're using AI for, and especially in the context of education, what educational purposes is it used for, and can users do those without barriers to their use? And then we're also thinking about copyright of ingested data for training and copyright and ownership of outputs. And I'm not quite sure I see the link to that yet back to our definition of open. Maybe you can help me see the connection there.
Yeah, I think it's because open is a projection or perception. And this is helping surface. Like I think there's surfacing another piece I think of open, which is being able to understand, clarify, point to the origin of like what if it is a perception or a projection that we put on something, it's also the like where do you get the evidence justification legitimacy to do that, right? Because like it's often CC by, and in doing that, you're saying you have the right to you have whoever the buy is giving whoever is putting that license on there is acknowledging or relinquishing copyright in exchange for Creative Commons license for others to use. Um, and within that is the assumption that that is the person's work, right? That they have the right to do that. We don't know if they have the right to do that with AI outputs. And so, again, it becomes tricky to be able to say, it is this quantum issue of the if something isn't designated as AI, being created by AI, it is designated if we don't know that, unless it's very clearly stated, and we assume it's copyrighted because that's the nature of at least my understanding of copyright is as soon as it's put out there, it's copyright. It's like de facto. At least that's how I understand it works in the US. And so there is this. So I put something out there. I have copyright to it. I give it CC license. But if I take something that's created by AI and I put it out there in a very legal way, I can't give it Creative Commons license if I don't. Okay, I could, but like conceptually or philosophically or legally, I couldn't give it a Creative Commons license because I don't necessarily have the right. We don't know whose rights it is that are being given away, and so or who who has the right to give it a Creative Commons license? Because we're not even sure where it sits legally. So I think that's the problem I'm trying to like work through in this is it's hard to make it fully clear if that's open without being able to um, really understand the legal standing of what an output is.
Right. So am I right in understanding then that many of the use cases for using something also will then involve, say, adapting or resharing some piece of work, and whether it's open depends on whether there's barriers to doing it. And at the moment, it's not even clear, is there a legal barrier or not, because we're not sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's also the other dimension of open that we haven't discussed before. You mentioned now about checking sources, seeing where information came from. And to me, that feels like a different kind of openness than no barriers to use. Or would you see them as one or two different things?
Um, I mean, I think they're still coupled. Like it's hard to disentangle them because in order, again, it's that in order to know something is open, somebody has to designate it. And in order to designate it, we have to understand who, like, where did it come from in order to give it that. Um, like in my head, those are, yeah, those are hard to disentangle. The like, where does this come from? With how do I know you have the right to give it to me? And I could probably think I could probably find it in like some of my research, which I should clarify. Like the other piece within all of this is my background in dissertation, which I'm defending in like 3 weeks, is about open access and academic piracy. And so this is another area that I've thought a lot about openness, but you know, could probably dig up a case where it's like somebody gave the rights away to something that they did. Actually, sometimes happens with publishers of like they publish something with the wrong person's name attached to it. And then there's this question of like in being published, who then had like how do you how do you recognize who, writing that wrong, so to speak? And that just reminds me of it's not an exact replication of this challenge of you can't declare something, you can't project or you can't project openness onto something without understanding where it's from.
And that much in the same sense is about the legal right to be able to do so.
Mm,
So in some ways, one could slap an open label on something, say publish it openly, but maybe they're not actually supposed to be doing so. So if there was an open label on something but shouldn't be,
mm.
then it's not open.
It's it's subject, yeah, or it is, yeah, because ultimately it becomes subject to potentially legal action. And I
Uh-huh.
think that's probably, that's where there's a lot of hesitation in all of the orphaned authors' work that have yet to be in the public domain. People are often pretty sure, or that the authors may be dead, but it's not clear, and so you wait out the time, right? There's abundance of works that are considered orphan author works, but because you can't check and verify it, people don't put those in the public domain because if you do, you say this is in the public domain, and then all of a sudden the author surfaces or a family member surfaces that says, no, no, I still have the copyright to it. You're subject to that legal that legal prosecution.
All right. Yeah, that clarifies the link, and puts it into one picture, I suppose.
Mm,
Barriers to access that are linked by a complex and changing legal landscape that's still a little bit foggy at the
mm.
moment.
Yeah,
It would be interesting to review this again in some months or
right?
perhaps years' time to see if it has
For
changed.
real, for real.
So that brings us to half an hour. I
Hmm.
still have a few more questions if you have time, but we could also end it here.
I do have to jump on to this is an awesome conversation. It's getting me thinking a lot of different things. How I do I should have given myself a little more wiggle room between meetings. But I do have another one I need to jump into. Is there a possibility of like following up in the last few questions, or is it
Yeah, totally. We could schedule to meet again another time if you're interested.
that would be amazing. Because I'd love to continue to like chat about this or contribute in whatever way makes sense.
Sounds good. So stop the recording here and we can see about it.